Are you seeing my slides, folks that are already on? All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to September Zero Suicide Learning Collaborative. Really looking forward to today's meeting. As per usual, if you are just trickling in, could you please put your name and your organization into the chat for attendance? And if you are from a large facility, please also include the actual site that you work at. It's helpful for us to keep track. And our little community check-in this morning, it's a little goofy. If you were a kitchen item or appliance this morning, what would it be? We have a new follow-up coordinator with the Office of Suicide Prevention, Jasmine. And Jasmine, I don't know if you're on this call, if you want to come off mute and say hello, no pressure, don't want to put you on the spot, but Jasmine gave me this check-in question. So if you were a kitchen item or appliance this morning, what would it be? Please feel free to drop that into the chat while you're putting in your name and organization. Courtney, the coffee maker. I was thinking about that one too. Makes sense. I think I feel like a teapot. When it's just starting to whistle, it's just starting to scream. Almost ready. Rachel, the spinny thing that makes your milk foam, that got huge during the pandemic. I feel like lots of people were making their fancy drinks from home for the first times. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to September Zero Suicide Learning Collaborative. Thanks so much for joining us. We are giving folks some minutes to trickle in to the meeting here. If you feel so inclined, please put your name, organization into the chat for attendance. If you come from a large org, please put your facility name. And our little check-in question this morning is, if you were a kitchen item or appliance this morning, what would it be? Oops. These answers are awesome. Thank you so much. This is making my day. Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're just getting started here. Today, in a little bit, we'll be hearing about suicide prevention in the construction industry. Just wanted to give you a brief update about the Learning Collaborative space. The calendar invite for these meetings is getting awfully tricky with the number of folks that we have on board. I've been attempting to go through and sift through emails that are getting bounced back, so it kind of clears up any of those invites that you might get more than once. So after this meeting, I'll be creating a new Zero Suicide calendar invite with what I hope is the most up-to-date list as possible. So please do keep an eye out for that email and those calendar invites, just so you're aware. We'll also chat about it at the October Learning Collaborative meeting, but I believe that the November date falls on Thanksgiving. So we'll likely be moving that to either a few days before or the week before, but I'll be communicating that via email. So please stay tuned. We're gonna get started in just a couple minutes, but if you can put your name, your organization, your facility name into the chat. That's how we keep attendance for the Learning Collaboratives. That would be great. And if you would like to, please also share what kitchen item or appliance you would be this morning. Thanks, Laura, for kicking in the transcript. Appreciate it. All right, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here. I am so pleased to welcome Randy Thompson from LivingWorks and the Construction Industry Alliance for Suicide Prevention to chat with us today about how your health system can better meet the needs of and understand the realities of the construction industry and suicide prevention efforts that your providers can take. So thank you so much for being here, Randy. Looking forward to your chat.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be able to talk about suicide prevention, believe it or not, and particularly in Colorado, which for some reason over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we're getting inundated with requests from organizations out of Colorado, many in construction, some not, which I think is a good sign. I was actually in Denver this year for the very first Construction Working Minds Summit that Sally Spencer Thomas had put on. Many of you probably know Sally. I'm actually familiar with the Colorado State Department of Suicide Prevention. Those of you who know Jared Heineman, who had been there for many years, was a former colleague of mine, unfortunately, but a very, very close friend. So, and I'm also in the Mountain Time Zone here in Calgary. So a lot of connectivity here and lots of good things happening in the state of Colorado around suicide prevention. So this is quite timely, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have throughout this little presentation. I always encourage that. I don't like to wait to the end, because I think people lose momentum and we kind of lose that spark there. So please feel free to ask any questions as we go. Colin will be monitoring the chat, so he'll stop me at any point and ask me to answer any questions that you guys have. So yeah, thanks for being here, and I hope you find this time well worth it. I am here as a CIASP board member, as well as a LivingWorks employee, but this request came through our CISP site, and that is a board that I've been working on for about 3 years now, but a board that has been on for many, many years. And really our mission is about education and training around suicide in the construction industry. CISP partners with LivingWorks, of course, as a provider for training. All of our training is evidence-based. We have both online and in-person training as well. So there's a very strong partnership there. But we also know that, you know, we're not the only game in town, and there's no way we're going to move the needle around suicide unless there's a collaborative. So working with state departments is critical to our success. And we want to make sure we're leveraging all the resources that we all have and making sure that people have access to them so that we can help make a difference. So hopefully today is a good start. When we look at suicide in the construction industry, the line here is really about time to rethink traditional safety and culture, which is significant in that we know that construction is so laser focused on physical safety, right? They do tons of training around that, but not so much around mental health and particularly suicide prevention. So we're trying to move the needle there and making suicide prevention and mental health just as important as physical health in the construction industry. So when we look at root causes, because we know, you know, our suicide is so prevalent in the construction industry, we look at what are the root causes, and often there's two. When we look at studies that are tied to suicide in terms of occupation, there are common factors that seem to lead to higher rates of suicide, where groups who experience low levels of control over their daily work or tasks, and whose occupation is perceived as having a low skill level, even within skilled trades within the construction industry. Those are two common factors that we see in terms of higher prevalence of suicide in occupation. There's some other perceptions in this industry, such as construction only cares about physical safety, and that construction is really not a technical industry, when in fact it very much is. So it's important that focusing on these issues, we believe at a cultural level, and starting to shift that culture will in that environment, in that industry, will help save lives at the same time and change culture. In terms of CISP's involvement, again, we got to leverage those that are in the industry, but also those that can help make a difference And this picture really is a symbol of folks that can help leverage what we do and take it forward. You see Mike Rowe here, who's a bit of a celebrity and particularly focused on mental health and construction, and has, mass that he can reach out to. The other picture is more on the political side, but really a symbol of how this is, this issue is a non-neutral, it's a non-labor issue, that it's important that we have support at all levels of both community and government, both state and federal, in order to make a difference. And some of our CISP folks, you see Michelle Walker there, for those who know Michelle, with SCC Underground, and Greg Sizemore, who's our current chair at CISP, and he's president at ABC. So leveraging their status in a way to help push our mandate forward and get either funding or get the word out there around suicide prevention and construction can help our cause. When we look at the construction industry in these terms around strength, determination, and grit, that's often a way to describe the industry and often what they look for in their workers. And while that's a great trait to have, sometimes it kind of backfires from a mental health perception where, people feel like they have to be strong, can't show any weakness. I got to be really gritty. And that is often a problem and a reason why many men who dominate this industry don't ask for help. It's not about changing the industry and making it soft or weak. It's really about creating awareness and building in protective factors around these identified risks in that industry. We'll talk a little bit about some of those factors as to why construction is so prevalent when it comes to suicide and suicidal ideation. There's a line here, it says, "We don't stop building tall buildings or digging deep trenches because it's dangerous. We try to create protective systems to help keep people safe while they're working on them." And in suicide prevention, it's no different. When we think about protective systems in the Living Works world, we call that building a network of safety. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the presentation. Any questions or comments so far, Colin, that I can address?
Haven't seen any come through in the chat quite yet, so full steam ahead. Thanks so much, Randy.
Yeah, no worries. I'll keep checking in. Part of shifting the culture, not just in the construction industry, but I think globally overall, is really how we refer to language when it comes to suicide and suicide prevention, and the need to kind of clean that up. You'll see terms such as commit. So we try to use the term die by versus commit, has versus is, and terms like weakness and selfish, which you'll find in some cases where people may take a mental health day or they're off on leave because of mental health, can be seen as a selfish act, or suicide itself can be seen as a selfish act. And we really need to change the vocabulary around that. When it comes to suicide, we prefer to say a person died by suicide, not committed suicide, because when you hear the word commit, there's a connotation there of something bad, like you commit a sin, right? Or you commit murder. So we're trying to shift the language around that. When it comes to mental health and depression or anxiety, some people may say, well, the guy has depression, whereas the guy is depressed, right? There's a shift there, because when you say someone has depression, there's a thought of a diagnosis there that really probably isn't the case. People are often depressed or stressed or anxious at specific moments in time. It's not a clinical diagnosis. And that shifts the language and the thought around suicide as well, because many do believe that people kill themselves because they're crazy, they're depressed. In most cases, suicide and suicidal ideation comes because of an incident that is temporary, an issue that they are dealing with at a specific moment that they're struggling to overcome over time. It is a mental health issue for sure, but it's not a clinical diagnosis, and suicide is not a mental health issue. It is a societal issue. So looking to change the language around that, and you'll see in all of our training, the word commit, the term commit has been removed, and we speak about how the person is doing in the moment versus is this a long-term diagnosis. So why is construction most at risk for suicide deaths? And here's some of the stats that I can share with you. And suicide in construction isn't specific to labor or general laborers. It's skilled tradesmen, it's operators, it's management. What we found in our statistics is operational managers are a bit higher in terms of incidents than others within the industry. There's an overall rate of about 50 per 100,000 construction workers who will die by suicide every year, which is 3.5 times higher than the national average. And like I said, equipment operators do have the highest prevalence. Well, what we also know is that suicide is not specific to construction. It is a societal issue. Every year in the US, almost 50,000 people die by suicide. And I think I kind of think about, think of Denver Stadium, right? Think about a sports arena, or where a baseball field where you've got about 50,000 seats there, and you think that every seat is taken, and every year, that number of people die by suicide, almost over 14 people per day. Or per 100,000, pardon me, and 130 to 132 people per day in the US die by suicide. So very significant numbers, but knowing that construction, mining, those are all at the top of the list when it comes to prevalence in terms of suicide, but it's certainly not specific to that industry. Just some more stats back from 2018, specific to construction. So making it relevant to organizations, and even though you may not have had a suicide at your site, it doesn't mean that people aren't thinking about it, because statistics also show that while there's every suicide, there's approximately 15 to 20 attempts or people who are thinking about it at the time, which is fairly significant as well. So just because you haven't had a suicide doesn't mean that it's not an issue within your site. It's definitely a workplace concern. When it comes to suicide and suicidal ideation, 1 in 5 adults will experience mental illness at some point, which represents almost 44 million people. And the sad part is almost 60% will be left untreated for various reasons, whether that's access to medical or mental health support. They simply just don't go. They don't feel like it's an issue that's that's severe enough that they would require some type of intervention. But for the most part, it's people without proper access to mental health support as to why these issues are left untreated. Depression and anxiety are often the most prevalent when it comes to mental health issues, as many of you know. And we start looking at, lost work days, lost productivities, et cetera. The impact that mental health issues does have on the organization is fairly significant. And I'm just kind of popping all this stuff in here, and I won't go through all the stats. You can read them later, but the cost is significant. So that makes it relevant for organizations to want to do something about it. It's just not a nice thing to do. It is critical that we start supporting our people upstream and try to avoid mental health issues as best as we can, provide supports in the moment while the person is having a difficult time, and then post, what can we do to ensure that that people are staying healthy, both physically and mentally. Okay. So when we look at construction risk factors specifically, and we've got a few here, these are what drive risk within the construction industry, both for mental health and suicide. We look at chronic pain, low margins for error, skills gaps, feeling stuck in a job. You've got many factors that construction workers face on a daily basis. Isolation, often construction sites are in remote locations because they're building, right? And they're away from home for days, for sometimes weeks, and essentially have, kind of a shitty place to live in the moment. So they'll often maybe go on, so what do we do in our time off, right? Well, a couple beers here or there, let's, maybe go to the pub, do whatever, right? That isolation away from home is very real and a challenge for many. And of course, chronic pain. We'll talk a bit later about the issue around opioids and the factor that plays into suicide and suicidal ideation, and access to mental health support. Often these organizations don't have the infrastructure in place to provide human resources, to provide EAP support, to provide mental health support. They essentially lean on each other for that level of support, and they're not necessarily trained in the proper way to be able to support that individual in the way they need to be. It's let's have another beer, or let's smoke a joint, or whatever, right? So a lot of factors in construction, specifically to that industry, that drive mental health. But also ways that we can mitigate it. Okay. When it comes to suicidal ideation and how the thought is, so how does someone get to that point, right? There is a fairly significant study that Thomas Joyner did, and he's a well-known suicide prevention researcher. And his theory of suicide is one that we share and that we refer to, and there's three different components. And this isn't specific to construction. This is overall the interpersonal theory of suicide, where someone we call has perceived burden. I can't even say it. Burdensomeness, which is a very fancy word. Thwarted belongingness, and then an acquired capacity for suicide. So if you look at this, we can call that the sweet spot here. The thoughts of desire of suicide is when the three come together, where you have prevalence of these three issues for an individual when they start to build a capacity for suicide. Sorry, I'm just going to skip to you back here. When it comes to perceived burdensomeness, it's really a thought of that the world is better without me, that they are a burden to those around them, to their organization, that perhaps they have poor health, so they're relying on the medical community. They're unemployed at the time, so they're a burden to people. They're unskilled. They're feeling a bit depressed. So they truly believe that the world is better if I wasn't here. The thwarting belongingness is a case where I am alone, right? Nobody gets me. You hear people often say that. They're not connected socially, and I don't mean social media, just in social environments. So they're loners, right? The issue, a person's need to feel that they belong is unmet at that time. And then with the acquired capacity for suicide, it's really often people don't suicide one time. There are usually attempts prior to that. And it's an accumulation of those attempts over time to salient experiences. And they're almost desensitized to painful experiences, where in fact, they are no longer afraid to die. And what most, from studies, what most people will tell you, and those that have attempted, is people don't want to die, they just don't want to live anymore. And while that may sound weird if you think about it, it's very true. So when we hear that, we believe that there's a chance, right? If they don't want to die, then there's a chance that we can impact that and be able to intervene and provide reasons to live for that individuals and help them see that, so that they maintain life. Any questions on the Joyner's theory of suicide? It's not my area of expertise, but it's really the combination of those three elements within an individual that can drive them to suicidal ideation. Any questions or comments around that?
Haven't seen anything come through the chat other than a comment earlier from Laura from CCH just saying thank you for commenting on the stigma piece with committed versus died by suicide. And then also on the interpersonal theory of suicide, I was just going to say, happy to follow up with some links for folks to check out about this theory and some of the research that's evolved in years following as well, in a follow-up, but I'll be sure to include you on that too, Randy. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Good. So when we talk about what we can do, and earlier we were looking at risk factors within the with the construction industry, the question is, so how can we start shifting that culture, right? How can we start creating a caring culture? Not to say that organizations don't care, but to show a caring culture, there are ways that we can mitigate those risks. And really it starts with leadership, right? And having an actual mandate and an agreement that suicide is an issue, right? If you don't believe that, and you don't believe that it is, then it's quite likely that you're not going to do much about it, or that you won't be very effective. So to agree that that is an issue is important, and then to get leadership support and to be able to champion a caring culture, to me is absolutely critical. You need folks on the ground who are responsible for developing, and you got a lot of skilled people be able to do that, but you really need that leadership support and encouragement to get the message out there. There are better ways around injury management and programs for folks to stay healthy, and pain management in particular, so that we're not just, prescribing opioids to people and sending them off, because often they're away from the work site. We don't know what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, but boy, they're at home, they're on opioids, highly addictive, perhaps alcohol or other drug issues, access to means around, means of suicide. So there's a lot of risk there in terms of just setting someone off on opioids and hope that they start feeling better and come back to work. Much more that can be done there. Encouraging peer support and relationships and building teams is an important one for suicide prevention. Some of you may have heard of Mates in Construction, which is a very successful suicide prevention program started in Australia. We endorse it. We've actually hired the founder who retired to help support us, not just in construction, but in other industries, and really start looking at building kind of a peer support culture within organizations, because at the end of the day, that's really how you build your networks of support. And that's who often your colleagues will go to in terms of support. They might not go to their boss. They might not go to HR for fear of repercussions. They're going to talk to their buddy about what's happening and how bad they feel, and they're depressed. It's quite often their colleagues with whom they go to. So how important would it be to train our colleagues on being able to respond to these conversations, be able to have them first of all, and be able to respond in an effective manner. And that's that's kind of the crux of what building a network of safety is about. Of course, other ways to build creative cultures or caring cultures on this list. The one in particular around at the end, building veteran protective factors is important in construction, because it often it attracts veterans to that industry once they're done their term, because it's a job type that is similar to what they were used to in the military, right? Same type of factors, got to be tough and gritty, and that's what I am, and I need to work with my hands, and so it is an industry that attracts veterans, and of course a huge veteran impact in construction, but also comes with its own risks. So let's make sure we build in protective factors for veterans as well. And training, education and training is so critical. I'm a social worker by trade, studied 4 years university, and I think we spent maybe an hour on suicide during those 4 years. Yet, I became a mental health social worker and a clinician. So it's not inherent that we know these skills, There is some training that's required, and you don't have to be a clinician, and you don't have to be a mental health specialist to be able to help someone and save someone from suicide. So when we look at what we can do around the joint or interpersonal theory of suicide, when we look at some workplace protective factors, is really management support, right? How do we mitigate a person from feeling like they're on an island? How do we empower someone to feel like they belong? How do we give someone strength to make them feel like they are actually important here in the workplace, that there's a reason to live, right? Again, management support, set realistic expectations around projects so that they're not constantly failing and feeling like a failure. Use constructive correctional actions when someone might be struggling, as opposed to just, it's like, let's just avoid that person, we'll pick up the slack for them. Use constructive correctional actions so that the person can actually learn. So much power in that. Around other protective factors, encouraging peer relationships is important, but be able to manage those relationships as well so that they stay healthy. And watch out for people at times of relationship changes, right? And many go through separations, divorces, that kind of thing. We read, stats, like half of, marriages end up in divorce. Well, that just doesn't happen overnight, right? And there's a lot of emotion there. So becoming aware of these changes is important in ensuring that the person has the support that they need. And often in these cases, EAPs, HR support can help there. Trauma exposure reduction and crisis management is so critical. When there's an injury or at a work site in construction, it is often traumatic. So it's limiting exposure to those traumas as best as you can, and providing real solid crisis management so that when something does happen on site, there's a team that responds quickly, effectively, ensures that people are being taken care of, not just at the moment, but after as well, because often these things come after, right? So yeah, some things that organizations can do to help mitigate those risks. When we look at performance issues and warning signs around suicide in the workplace, some of these signs can be decreased problem-solving ability, decrease in self-confidence, productivity. This is not new to probably many of you. And what I always tell folks, because I worked in EAP for many years, is when you notice a change in someone's behavior, not that they start to swear or yell, because that could be just them, right? It's like, well, Bob's always been like that. It's changes in behavior, significant changes that I think managers need to be trained on to be able to identify and be able to address. Increase, of course, in incidents, injuries, etc., conflicts with coworkers. There are a number of warning signs that people can recognize and be able to interject. If it's once, happens once, probably not a big deal, but over time, if it's persistent, then there's a pattern there, and perhaps some type of interjection is required. And there's a way to do that. There's a way to have a conversation with that individual so you get to the root of the problem, and which is critical to be able to refer to the proper resource or help that person might need. Okay. A bit earlier, I talked a bit about the impact of opioids and the prevalent use of them with people, with patients and prescriptions, and very little management around them at the time. I came back recently from stage 4 cancer treatment. I was in chemotherapy for months and had major surgery, and I was prescribed opioids as a painkiller. I'd never been on them before, and they were strong, man. They were really strong. And I was, and I got to experience that, and I could see easily how addictive that these opioids could be. I'm not an addictive personality, but over time, man, I had to watch myself in terms of how I manage my dosage and how I manage the length of time that I needed to take these opioids. So imagine if, and I'm supposedly a mental health expert. Imagine if I'm not, right? And I don't have those skills or that insight. These opioids quickly become an issue on their own, and can lead to suicidal behavior and suicidal ideation. And we see a lot of prevalence in terms of illegitimate use of these opioids. We see folks, refilling their prescriptions and selling them on the street. So there's a lot that needs to be done around opioids, and a real flag to organizations, particularly in construction, to be able to manage those that are off on disability and it might be taking these opioids to ensure that we're keeping an eye on things, and there's supports there if you need it. Just some more statistics on what we found in terms of pharmaceutical for opioids and the prevalence of and dangers of risk of addictions. Because often these aren't just a week or 2 weeks. Often these prescriptions last months. So increased risk in terms of dependence, becoming dependent on them, and also risk of them just continuing use and addiction. So, so when we do perceive these signs, or we do become aware that there might be issues, there's nothing wrong with speaking up. Not speaking to, but speaking up. What we hear from folks is, they talk about how they're feeling of being trapped. I'm trapped in this job. I have no skills. I'm just a general laborer, or we're all effed up because in the construction. There's a real belief there that that industry endorses these types of personalities and behaviors, and that's just not true. So we have to shift that culture. If folks are talking, you hear people talking about their willingness to die or wanting to die. They feel like they're a burden. So we talked about that joiner, right? These are things that you might hear. What people might be doing that could lead to suicidal ideation is that, talk about tardiness, absenteeism, presenteeism in the workplace, decreased productivity, near misses or hits and safety incidents. So there's things that they not just say, but things that they do that tells you there's a problem, and things that might be happening in their lives that you might hear about. Again, relationship issues, life changes, loss of a loved one, financial difficulties in particular, or injuries, often a back injury that lasts for months and is prevalent, can turn into a mental health injury as well. In a way, we call that comorbidity in the insurance world, where now you're dealing with both a physical and a mental health problem at the same time. So we need to be aware of that and make sure that there's supports available to that person, and that we're actually following up with them during that time to ensure that they're doing okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. Many organizations feel like the person goes off on disability, which I was, and we have to leave them alone and they'll come back, and that's so not true. To check in every once in a while tells me that you care about me, and that you care about how I'm doing, and that you're looking forward to me coming back. One of the biggest issues in disability and return to work is someone who's been off for an extended period of time, no one's made contact or no one's been in touch with them, and all of a sudden a year later they come back. And if it's a mental health issue, often colleagues are concerned about, what do I say, what do I do? Like it's a different situation with that person, and often makes for a very poor return to work experience. So keeping in touch and checking in once in a while, there's nothing wrong with that. When we talk about things that we can do upstream call it midstream, in the moment, and downstream, here are some strategies that organizations can use, particularly in the construction industry, to ensure that people are getting the help they need up front, that there's support for them when there is an issue, and that downstream, we're going to continue to support you and try to do what we can to mitigate the issue from happening again. We talk about caring cultures, preventive factors upstream. It's all about prevention and early intervention, right? EAPs are great for that, or at least they say they are. Some are better than others, but really that's a resource that probably is underused for the most part, probably has more capability for organizations than they think, and has more accountability, in my opinion, around upstream support. Midstream, of course, is often HR related, manager related. Make sure that your teams are trained and be able to support someone in the moment, particularly for a mental health issue. They seem to be doing a great job around physical health problems. They know what to do, but make sure that we have a solid process and supports for mental health as well. And then downstream, what have we learned from these issues? What can we do to help mitigate them after they've happened? As well as, crisis response, crisis management, trauma response. If there's a sudden death on the site, that there's a trauma response team there able to support the individuals who saw it, perhaps witnessed it, and who may go home and have issues with it later. So there's lots that can be done, both upstream, midstream, and downstream, and resources available for organizations to be able to take advantage of that. So when we think about what can we do when we identify someone who might need help, who might be in trouble, might be thinking about suicide, this slide really speaks to some of the stuff we talk about at LivingWorks and how we can interject and have a conversation with someone who might be having a problem. And I assure you, one of the biggest reasons why people don't interject or don't have a conversation with someone is either because they don't feel qualified, or they feel like the other person's going to be really mad. Like I'm stepping in, I'm overstepping my boundaries, and they're going to be pissed at me because it's none of my business. I assure you, when someone has thoughts of suicide and is struggling with mental health issues, there's nothing wrong with someone asking, "How are you?" Right? How are you doing? So what we can do is we call it tuning in. Right? When you notice or sense that someone might need help, you can focus your attention on some of those warning signs that we had talked about a little earlier. Is this just like a one-day thing and they're fine? Or has this been over time and now there's a pattern, right? So tuning into that individual is important. Looking at the body language as well, with the things that they're saying, things that they're doing. And don't be afraid to ask. And it's such a hard question. And in our training, we actually have a role play where we get people to ask someone if they have thoughts of suicide. And despite a person's experience or expertise and background, it is a hard question to ask. But it's one that's super important because you really want to confirm whether that person has thoughts of suicide or not. And it's a very clear, direct question, and it is without judgment, right? Are you thinking about suicide? I have to ask. You've talked about this a separation from your spouse or partner, and it seems it's been ongoing. You say that you're depressed. You show up to work late quite a bit. You talk about not wanting to be here. I have to ask you, are you thinking about suicide? And it's important to ask the question directly. Otherwise, they tend to avoid it, and you're not actually getting the answer you're looking for to that question. State that suicide is serious and connecting to help is important. That, this is, a lot of people just say, I'm just having a bad day. I think it's important that as a helper, they understand that you feel that the issue is serious, because at the end of the day, it really is. And being able to connect them to support is super important. So when that person knows that, then they know you're listening, you've heard, you understand where they're at, and you care about them, right? You're not judging them. Matters not what brought you to this state. What matters is that you get the help that you need. And It's probably not me, but it could be somewhere else, right? And I'm going to make sure to connect you there, and get them to that resource that they need. And that's why in suicide prevention, we feel it's important to have that person available in the moment if they can, or at least on the phone. So you'll find in our LivingWorks training that we actually ask people to put resources and numbers in their phone. Those that are not perhaps trained in our assist training to deliver or actually to intervene and create a safety plan for that person because they are actively suicidal, that they're able to connect with resources in the moment with that person at that time to ensure that there's a connection there and that they will be following up. Okay, so that's our task approach in like a nutshell. I don't do it justice here, but you kind of get the idea. And anyone who might be interested in that, I would highly recommend that that you actually attend our training. Okay.
Hey,
So,
Randy.
yes.
Just want to take a brief pause to address some of the comments that have come into the chat, if that's all right.
Yeah, I'm pretty well, this is kind of the last slide, so I'm pretty well done here. So please.
Okay. Is it okay to stop, or would you rather I wait a little bit?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, you're just getting a lot of love in the chat.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Kansas Rogers commented, it's a helpful reminder to know that everybody has a role in suicide prevention, regardless if they have a clinical role or not.
Yes.
Totally agree. Anybody who submitted these comments, please feel free to come off mute if you'd like to share more. Stephen Fisher from WellPower said your presentation is very helpful. Thanks for sharing your expertise and great work, and for sharing your experiences about being a cancer survivor. So thankful you're doing well now. Echoed and heard. Thank you so much, Randy, for sharing, and very glad that you're on the other side of that. Shauna Lee mentioned, thank you again for sharing your personal experiences. Information is important and timely. Marcel said, absolutely, Randy, just a call can make a huge difference, emphasizing on that warm touch point with folks really making a difference. And also for anybody who hasn't done the LivingWorks START training, I actually just retook that at the beginning of this week. OSP still has plenty of free licenses for that training, and it's just such a helpful gatekeeper, 1 hour long tool to help you practice these skills and learn about different situations they might come up in. So please do feel free to access that. We'll send out the link in a follow-up. Becky also asked in the chat, is there a concern that asking if someone is thinking about suicide may put the thought into their mind? And do want to touch on this too. Jasmine into the chat said, in my experience, asking directly and that specific time can mean so much and do so much for the individual. Sometimes stating and naming suicide can offer the person the relief to be able to open up what they're experiencing. And I totally agree with Jasmine. This is actually a very common misconception with asking about suicide, that the act of asking about it will put the thought into someone's head. And normally, when we think about that question, you won't be introducing the idea of suicide to someone for the first time. Often, if you are concerned, this is something that has been on someone's radar, and asking about it, just like Jasmine said, really opens up space to be able to chat about that. Randy, do you have any other follow-up thoughts there?
Well, no, that was the next comment answered the question around putting thoughts of suicide in someone's mind. And the great reality is people don't just start thinking about suicide in the moment. They have already thought about it many times. So someone to actually bring it up that does not kind of plant that seed. That seed's already there. What you're planting is the seed of hope when you actually do ask the question, because no one's asked it yet. Yet it's been on my mind for likely months, maybe years. So do not be afraid to ask that question. You are not going to trigger any suicidal behavior or thoughts. They've already been there. You're going to trigger hope and an opportunity for support.
Randy, this is Kimberly. I had asked earlier about what program you are adopting to build peer support in the culture in the organization. I missed the name of that.
Yeah, so the one in particular, kind of the prototype for construction is Mates in Construction, which started in Australia. And that is a model where they ask that they take sites take ownership of their suicide prevention program and access training and user training that's available. Often a lot of it is LivingWorks, where we train people at different levels because people want to play different roles. Colin mentioned START a little earlier, and that is a great place to start. But it actually is a skill building training that we offer people as well. And it begins the conversation around, is this person suicidal? Am I able to have this conversation? What can I say? Then there's kind of next level training that we offer, which is Safe Talk, which is our half-day training that gets a little deeper, and being able to how to identify someone who might need help, and be able to have that conversation, role play different situations, etc., and lead and connect that person to help. And then it goes right to our 2-day assist training, globally aware assist training, where you actually are able to build a safety plan with that person in that moment. And what the peer support model can look like is you have people within that organization at different levels, because not everyone wants to be assist trained or wants to do that, but you need to have a certain level of support in those different roles within the organization. And as you build skills and culture, what happens is there's less of a chance for someone to fall through the cracks within that organization, but because you have a culture of suicide prevention awareness and training, and it's almost impossible for someone, to not be noticed or for support to not be offered. And that the organization itself owns that program. Who's responsible for suicide prevention? It's not a hospital, it's not the psychiatrist, psychologist, it's not the social workers, it is us as a community. So that's a model that we look to build within organizations to help them and to empower them with those skills, but also ensure that they are managing it, and they are essentially standing up for suicide prevention.
Thank you so much, Randy. Hope that
Yeah,
answered
it's a
that
great question.
Yeah, I think the only other resource that I would point to in that area is also just the General Zero Suicide website. There's a whole host of resources, templates, kind of guidelines, best practices about creating that culture of sharing and openness and support in organizations. So if you haven't, I would definitely recommend perusing the Zero Suicide website for all of those resources and evidence behind that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much here. CISP, Prevent Construction Suicide. So again, we are a membership of 10 very passionate people in construction around suicide prevention. And our mandate is to educate and support. And so we get funding through construction into the companies, sites, and we look to build supports on our website, and actually hard copies. Some of you can see my jacket back here. So we ask organizations to take the pledge around suicide prevention, to make a difference, to start owning it within their organization. And we're able to provide tons of resources and supports that are free when you take the pledge, to ensure that that you're addressing suicide in the workplace. That's all I have in terms of this fun deck here. Any other questions or comments? I know we're getting near that time, but got a couple minutes.
I'll hold some space as well. Again, thank you so much for all of this great information, Randy. You've had multiple comments in the chat saying the same. So really appreciate you taking the time and especially framing suicide prevention, risk factors and protective factors specific to the construction industry with patients who work in this area. It's so helpful to have these resources and knowledge behind the implementation teams. And for those of you working with community groups, I know so many of our Zero Suicide teams on the call have solid relationships with like trade organizations in their area. Please do peruse the CISP website. There is a host of resources that you're able to share in the suicide prevention space with construction workers. So we'll send that up in a follow-up email. Randy, if it's okay, I'd love to include your contact information in there as well.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to do that too. I don't think people have my email. And of course, the Living Works website as well. And know that we're not just a training company, we are a consulting company. And we are happy to meet with an organization. We do this every day around. So how do we start building this, right? Because it's so daunting. It's like, where do I start? Come and talk to us. We're happy to have that conversation, talk about some of your goals and objectives around suicide prevention and what a model might look like within your organization that we believe will be effective. So feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Thank you so much. Again in the chat, lots of thanks. Great timing, had a recent trauma on a construction site. Great presentation, very informative and helpful. So thank you so much, Randy.
It is my pleasure.
With our last few minutes, Randy, would you mind unsharing your screen just so I can share some OSP updates?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Don't have too much to share here. If you haven't put your name and organization into the chat for attendance, would love for you to do that. Just want to flag these. We'll also go out in an email to you all on October 4th, a free session about strengthening family coping resources. We know suicide prevention, as much as an individual issue, is also a family and community issue. So should be a great training opportunity there. Other learning opportunities today, preventing suicide among LGBTQ+ people. Also today, right after this learning collaborative, the role of trust and health literacy in achieving health equity and suicide prevention. A variety of sessions coming up from CAMS, specifically working with teens, again, touching on that family angle, looping in parents. A session on 9/27 at 1 p.m. Mountain. Also, please check out the new Colorado Peer Support Professional Association, a great way to embed peers in your zero suicide work. And also wanted to flag a podcast called Suicide and Stuff, where every Tuesday they rotate through topics relevant to suicide prevention. Sometimes it's stories of lived experience, but a really helpful tool. And also an ask for you all, if anybody attended the Deaf Cultural Responsiveness training and webinar that was held at the end of last month, I would love to hear feedback on that training opportunity, just so we can know whether that's something to recommend for systems in the future. These are recurring opportunities. Again, please feel free to check out the slides when those are sent out to you. And otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Thank you again, Randy, for that amazing presentation. And we will look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting on Thursday, October 27th at 10 a.m. I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and thank you so much, everyone.